Recently, I did a video on white supremacy groups training and amassing right out in the open, how they're planning for a race war. And some commenters asked, what is their goal? Why are they doing this? And there are dozens of possible answers to that question, but I want to key in on something important here in terms of historical context and to shed light on a dark past in America. Have you heard of breeding plantations? Probably not, especially if you're Canadian. But this also fits in with Alberta recently banning 221 books, including The Handmaid's Tale. I doubt there's too many people who haven't watched at least some of the series, if not read the book. So most of you are undoubtedly aware of the Atlantic slave trade, that stain on human existence that spanned from the 16th century through the 19th century, though the first European involvement in trading enslaved Africans began in the 15th century. This period saw transportation of millions of enslaved people from Africa to the Americas, primarily through a triangular trade route. The importation of enslaved people in the United States was prohibited by the Act prohibiting the importation of slaves, which went into effect in 1808. So plantation owners had a big problem, right? They still needed the free labor to profit from, but the legal supply had dried up. Slavery was still legal, just the importation of slaves wasn't. And so they decided to switch gears, turn black wombs into factories and black men into breeding studs, and force black slaves to give them more product. If they couldn't import forced labor, they'd breed it, because slaves were considered property, chattel, product. So where the slave trade was the kidnapping, the breeding plantations were the rape farms. And that's indeed what they were called back then, breeding farms. Black women weren't seen as mothers, but a uterus with a resale value. Their fertility was the commodity and their babies assets on a ledger. This was, plain and simple, organized and legalized rape. And not just perpetuated on the women, but forced upon the men too. The men were forced to mate with women not of their choosing, sometimes with multiple women in a row. The owners also experimented with slaves, forcing family members to breed with one another to highlight or concentrate certain genetic traits such as docility or strength. And this wasn't morally reprehensible to them, since they weren't humans in their mind. They forced some women to have 10, 15 children, not out of love, but out of cold-blooded capitalism. The goal was always profit. Black girls as young as 13 were raped to kickstart their production. If they couldn't reproduce, they were whipped, beaten, or killed. And American slavery remained viable because unproductive areas, i.e. areas that couldn't grow cotton or sugar, functioned as slave exporting states, while Louisiana imported slaves from these states. So, producing slaves and moving them from the Old South to the New South was a big part of the slave economy. Essentially, states like Kentucky, Virginia, and Maryland became baby farms for the Deep South, where they were worked at a rate that didn't allow for child rearing. Folks, this is the legacy that built America's wealth. Those early plantation owners made millions off children born in these violent and non-consensual systems. And while Wall Street was not built specifically for the slave trade, a section of the wall that gave it its name was used as a site for an official slave market, and the enslaved population literally built the city, making its economy run. The proximity of the slave market to where the stock market was later established highlights the connection between the growth of the slave-based economy and the foundation of New York's financial industry. It created today's billionaires. And advances in gynecology came at the expense of black women too. Doctors experimented on those same women, often without anesthetic. Gynecology was literally founded on the abuse and inhumane treatment of black wombs. And if any of what I just said makes you uncomfortable, it should. Because America wasn't built by accident. It was built with slavery and intentional systemic rape. But what does all that have to do with today? Well, first, Generational trauma is a thing, proven. But specifically to my other video, when you see white supremacy groups popping up in your neighborhood, know that what it means is there are still people today who desire us to go back to that time. A time when slavery was legal and breeding farms can pump out new stock. And when that free labor can be used to make Canada great again. Because that's what they mean when they say it. What some in our country want is comfort for white folks. Not justice, not truth, comfort. So that's what those groups are saying, loud and clear. And they're planning for the prospect of a Handmaid's Tale scenario too. So I'm not going to let history die just because it makes some people uncomfortable. These things happened, and some would like it to happen again. But you watch all the comments in defense of these groups and minimizing history, and the deflection that'll undoubtedly come out in the comments. But see them for what they are. Peace out, and if you're not already following me, you should. It's going to be a ride.